inside.
Proverbial wisdom, how's that function?
Wise and godly teachers speaking it forthright.
Proverbial wisdom, what's their function?
Knowledge, understanding, get you where we're landing. Wisdom, learn wisdom like this is wise, not that. Knowledge, that comes with experience. Do this, not that. Understanding, listening and reading to see this means that. These three and more Proverbs has in store.
Proverbial wisdom, what's your function?
Showing you godly wisdom and insight.
Proverbial wisdom, how's that function?
Wise and godly teachers speaking it forthright.
Proverbial wisdom, what's their function?
Knowledge, understanding, get you where we're landing.
Proverbial.
Welcome to the chapel where plagiarism is okay. I'll ask you to turn to Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs 14 is where we're going to be today. As we're going to Proverbs chapter 14, kind of right in the middle of the Bible, if you're opening up a hard copy to look at and follow along. As we're getting there, I want to tell you a true story. This is a true story. When I was in high school, having just gotten my driver's license, I remember vividly there was one Saturday where a couple friends from high school and I were getting together for lunch. And in a very inefficient way, we all drove separately to lunch. Because when you're a new driver, you get your driver's license, you're just still experiencing the thrill of being able to drive yourself for the sake of being able to drive yourself, not getting dropped off by mom or dad and you know, that humiliating, you know, I hope no one saw me kind of moment, right? So we all drive to this restaurant, but my friend James and I got to the restaurant first. And our third friend, who will remain nameless, and you will see why, they will remain nameless in this story, they were detained. So after about a few minutes, my friend James calls her up and he says, "Hey, where are you?" And she says, "Well, I'm driving on Sheridan Drive. How do I get to the restaurant again?" And James said, "You're coming down Sheridan, turn right on the boulevard. It's a mile down on the left-hand side. Turn right on the boulevard." Okay. So 15 minutes go by and we still haven't seen our friend, and James calls her again and says, "Hey, where are you? I thought you were close by." "Yeah, I thought I was too. I guess I missed that sign. What was it again?" "Yeah, just turn down the boulevard and it's a mile down on the left-hand side." Another 15 minutes pass. Now we're getting frustrated because we're hungry, and this is when we discovered what hangry really meant. And so finally, another phone call, maybe after an hour of waiting, after we had finally decided to order our food and just said, well, at least we're going to have lunch, James calls her again and says, "Are you okay? Are you alive? Like, is there anything we need to know?" And just for some context, our friend, like us, had just gotten her driver's license, and so she's a new driver learning how to navigate, and she also grew up in like a very remote, distant part of Clarence. So to ask for her to come to Tonawanda for lunch was asking a lot. I'm pretty sure she packed provisions just in case she had to spend the night in town, you know, that kind of a thing. Like, "Hey, I'm going in, you know, Oregon Trail kind of a thing." And so finally, that last phone call after an hour, and James said, "Are you alive?" And she says, "I've driven up and down Sheridan Drive so many times, and I haven't seen one single street sign that said the boulevard." Yeah. She didn't know that it was called Niagara Falls Boulevard, and we didn't think that needed to be explained. And so my friend James and I had a great lunch that day. Have you ever thought you had all of the information you needed, only to find out you were missing a really critical piece of information? Have you ever thought you knew where you were going, and then had to stop and admit that you didn't? Or, really fun, have you ever been in a car with someone and you say, "I think we're lost," and that person says, "We're not lost, I know where I'm going," and you know that you're lost, but you can't say it because they've just said, "I know where I'm going," so then you have to wait in the car while they figure out that you're really lost? Have you ever experienced that? Yeah, a few applause. Okay, don't look at your spouse, all right? That's rule number one, elbows, don't do that. See, here's the thing, nobody wants to admit that they have miscalculated or been wrong in navigating. Nobody wants to admit that they've perhaps chosen the wrong path. Nobody wants to admit that they don't know which way they're going or how long it's going to take. Nobody wants to admit those things because we want to give the appearance that we know what we're doing, that we're experienced, that we've taken paths like this before. And so nobody wants to admit, or no one is quick to admit, I should say, when they've maybe gotten it wrong. And sometimes it takes a lot longer to correct that path than it ever did to get lost in the first place. Solomon has been dropping wisdom for us, and I think we've gained a lot from that. I have. But in this proverb today that we're going to look at, Solomon's going to share something tangible for us as it pertains to navigating life's paths. It says this in Proverbs chapter 14, beginning in just verse 12. It says this, "There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death." There's a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Or there is a way that seems right to a man, to a person, but its end is the way of death. There's a way that seems right. Quite literally, a way that appears to be straight right in front of them. It seems to be an easy path. There's a way that seems to be straight right in front of a person. And when you're walking on a straight path, you don't really need to pay close attention. You don't need to watch your step. You can kind of just coast. It's kind of like when I'm pushing our 1-year-old son in a stroller. The sidewalks in our neighborhood are not a path that appears to be straight. The sidewalks in our neighborhood have been displaced by trees that I think are from the Mesozoic era or something like that. And so the roots have, popped up the sidewalks in a lot of places. So when I'm walking with our son, I got to do kind of a lot of odd things to get over and around these sidewalk bumps. I mean, I guess I could just not pay attention, but I don't know what that would do to him. Like, he would experience a lot of turbulence. We're experiencing rough air. Please hold, that kind of a thing. Compare that to maybe when you're on the bike path. Or maybe if you've ever been to Disney World. We went to Disney World for 3 days earlier this year because we were not allowed to take out another mortgage on our home in order to stay any longer than that. 3 days was plenty, by the way. But we were navigating. We had borrowed a double stroller from our friends, and so we put the 1-year-old and the 4-year-old in the double stroller, and I was walking around on these, of course, pristine, perfectly paved roads through Epcot, and I could kind of just walk around like this. I mean, yeah, I clipped a few heels every now and then, but honestly, it was fine, and I could take in all the different countries and Epcot and all of that, and these kids were having a great time. But when the road is rocky or shaky or uncertain or not so straight in front of you, it requires a lot more diligence, a lot more paying attention. But when it's smooth, you really don't even need that much light. You don't need to be paying that close of attention. You can kind of just coast. But the proverb says there is a way that seems straight. There's a way that seems to be perfectly paved. There's a way that appears. There's a path that looks. There's a road that seems to be fine. But the stakes are much higher than just not knowing where a street sign is. Look at it again in Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. It leads to death. The Hebrew language is actually much more emphatic than what our English language can even capture. It's almost somewhat clumsy if we try to translate it literally. In the end are the ways of death, plural. There's a way that seems to be right, but in the end are the ways of death, plural. See, deception starts out small, almost appears to be insignificant. And if you're navigating on a path that's straight, you may be lulled to sleep. You may be anesthetized to the danger that's ahead. And so you'll be navigating on a seemingly straight path, but there is a cliff over the crest of that hill. Its end are the ways of death, almost like it opens up new chambers of destruction that you did not foresee. That's the thing about deception. It's sneaky. So this deception starts small, but it ends all-encompassing. Why is that? Because we've based our assessment on the path on superficial things and things that we feel like we know about, because this is all based on our opinion. Our assessment of the path is not based on reality, clearly. It's based on our opinion. It seems to be fine. It appears to be right. There's actually a parallel proverb to the one that we're looking at, the one that we were just looking at Proverbs 14:12. There's a parallel just over in Proverbs 12. Look at this in Proverbs 12:15. It said, the way of a fool seems right, is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. What's that saying? I can be so self-convinced of my own path to my own peril. I can be so self-convinced that I know what I'm doing. I know how to get to where I want to go. There's the freedom, there's the autonomy of the human spirit that's fanned into flame by the American dream. And there I am, I know exactly what I'm doing. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes. His own eyes. Her own eyes. That description from Proverbs reminds me of how the nation of Israel was described in the time before the kings. And the time before the kings was a season in the life of Israel where Israel was governed by a series of judges. And in Judges 17:6, the author puts it this way: in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is God's people. They lived like there was no king in Israel. There wasn't a throne in Israel, and they acted like there wasn't anyone on the throne in heaven. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. No one's asking, is this right in God's eyes? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, in his eyes, in her eyes. There was a deception that flowed out of being self-convinced that I know which way is best. And being self-convinced leads to being self-deceived. But not just that, maybe we could put it this way. Self-deception paves the way for self-destruction. Self-deception actually paves the way for self-destruction. That's exactly what our proverb today told us, isn't it? Proverbs 14:12 said, there is a way that appears right. There is a way that appears right. That's self-deception. But in the end, it leads to death. That's self-destruction. Nobody chose this for you. There's nobody that we can blame. Only ourselves. After all, we may be frustrated and say, but that's not fair. Yet at the same time, we didn't want to invite any wisdom. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes and will not listen to advice. A wise man will. A fool won't. It seems right, it seems harmless, and who does it seem right or seem harmless to? To me. My opinion. You see, self-deception will always lead you to believe that you and I can see further down the road than we actually can. It will lead us to believe that we've got things in view and we've got it covered. This is manageable. I got this. We'll just put a little more oomph and a little more gumption behind it, and I've got this. And self-deception will always lead you to believe that you can see more than you actually can, that I can see more than I actually can. But you can't see that cliff. You can't see what's over the crest of that hill. We know what this sounds like. Maybe these aren't things that you've said, but they're things that you've heard. It's only one drink. What could come from just one drink? Or it's only one hit, and I can stop anytime that I want to. Or it's just lunch. It's just coffee. It's just, yeah, I know that they're married to somebody else, but